Alright, welcome to my second video log. Today I'm going to talk about the graphics pipeline, just my general knowledge of it, and yeah, let's talk about a very base graphics pipeline. So something that doesn't get covered a lot, which honestly it should, is, here let me get that, is the CPU. I know it's not technically or officially part of the graphics pipeline, but it is, because here you have to assign what VBOs you're going to send, various other stuff. Like some people actually multiply their model view projection on the CPU, then send it to the graphics pipeline as just one matrix, rather than having the graphics or the GPU doing that. The reason they do that is because when you send three matrices to the GPU, it literally multiplies those three matrices together every single vertex data given. So that's obviously a lot of computation on runtime. But normally what I do is I send all three of them to the GPU because I don't have problems with the GPU getting bogged down. Just really just the CPU. Okay, so the CPU basically creates the data that you're going to send to the GPU. So for this instance, let's say it is a square. So it's in a VBO, or it came from an OBJ file or whatever. So we're sending this square to the GPU. This square is data, rather. Sorry, not the square. Okay. So the first step in the pipeline is a vertex shader. Now what that vertex shader does is it takes the square's vertex points and puts it in the world. So here are its four vertices. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. Let me just... They're probably more visible now. Okay. So it takes its vertices and then it multiplies them by the model view projection matrix to put it in the world. So now it has world coordinates, so these points are now in the world. And it does it in sequence, or so each one is multiplied in one at a time. Yeah. So now we have a four vertices in world coordinates. So after that, it gets sent to the geometry shader. Now, specifically what data gets sent to the geometry shader? The vertices, but not in the original form that was sent in from the CPU. Not this data. It's actually sent from the world coordinates. Okay, so now let's draw it over here. So purple. There we go. So it gets sent the world coordinates. Vertices. Alright, so now this is kind of cool. I like the geometry shader. It's kind of neat. What it does is it takes, once it has 3 points, it actually draws a triangle. So of course, remember we do this in sequence. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, right? They get multiplied in. Same with the geometry shader. So it goes, okay, I've got my first point, I've got my second point, I've got my third point, 3 points. I can now make a triangle. It tries its best to form a triangle. And then we give it 3 more points, so 1, 2, 3, and it forms a triangle again. Alright, so now we have a, I guess, geometry formed square. Now the next step in the pipeline is the rasterizer. Now the data being sent this time is the geometry itself. You see how this kind of the data keeps building in the graphics pipeline is kind of neat like that? So it's the geometry itself in world coordinates. So that gets sent over here. And let's draw it again. And there we go, we got our square. And let's... It's not changing color for some reason. It's weird. Okay, we'll pretend that these are different colors. So it has its 4 vertices, now it has this geometry, and it's in world space. Cool. Now it gets sent, all this data gets sent to the rasterizer. Now what the rasterizer does is it has a grid, right? And now what this grid is the pixel layout. Now what it tries to do is it tries to fit this object into the pixel grid, tries to assign pixels to it, make it, fit nicely on the screen so you're not missing half of it because it's not in any pixels. So once that's done, and then it interpolates a lot of data based on these pixels. That also happens, but I'm not really going to touch on that. I'm just kind of going over how it builds. So, alright, so now it has its pixels, so this gets sent to the fragment shader. So we're sending it to the fragment shader. Why won't this change color? Okay, so it gets sent to the fragment shader. So now let's draw it over here for the fragment shader. It gets its world coordinate, right? There's the world. Its vertices, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now it has its pixel layout of the square. Nice. So that is sent to the fragment shader. And now what the fragment shader does is it takes in these pixels, right? And then it colors them in based on either you can assign them all one color, or you can use like a texture object and apply it based on the coordinates that were given earlier in the data, which are called UVs. There you go. But, well, for the sake of argument, and since my color doesn't change, we'll say we're going to color the entire object purple. So it gets sent its first pixel, its second pixel, its third pixel, and so on and so forth until the whole thing is colored in. Now, because it's the same color, I know it like colors away the pixels, but the pixel data is still there. Now they're just colored in. Okay, now after the fragment shader, this gets sent to the frame buffer. Actually, well, I shouldn't have drawn that. Disregard that one. There you go, frame buffer. There's no more world anymore because you're looking at it and you get a nice square. We'll say that that's fully colored in. And then eventually it gets switched to the monitor. And there you go. Now you have a nice square that's colored in, pixelated, it's in world space, and it's colored. And yeah, that's the graphics pipeline in a nutshell. At least a very like base graphics pipeline. Of course, there's lots of crazy stuff that you can do, but this is just like a very base one. Alright, thanks for watching.